G is for graphic design. Welcome to another video in the A to Z of writing language learning materials. Most of us consider ourselves writers, but there's also a design element to what we do. If we create a set of slides for our students or for a presentation, we need to design them. If we create a lesson, a worksheet on a page, we have to think about the design, and it's not something that comes naturally to all of us. Well, today I'm going to speak to Lucía Pin. She's from Montevideo in Uruguay, and I met her at TESOL Tampa this year, where she was giving a presentation on graphic design. And I loved her ideas, I loved her tips. They're real takeaways. She looks at things like font, color, photography, but also other areas of graphic design like hierarchy and alignment. But I won't tell you anymore. Let's go and meet Lucía.
Well, my name is Lucía. I work at the Alianza, that is a binational center in Montevideo, Uruguay, in South America. My profession, I'm an architect, and that's why my passion for graphic design, because even though architects are not graphic designers and I am not a graphic designer, this is something that I feel passionate about, because we do a lot of graphic design in our job. And I'm also an EFL teacher, and currently I have the role of the director of educational services at the place where I work. And I have a lot of experience designing materials for students. So I'm combining all of my passions in one presentation, in one topic, that is this one.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Lucía. Design is an area that most teachers don't have a design background, and more and more it becomes a crucial part of, if you like, writing materials or creating materials. And I think your ideas are particularly useful for teachers who are creating slides or doing PowerPoint-based lessons. But there's also a lot there that's relevant to anybody, even if you're still designing on a page and so on. There's lots of good ideas out there. It might be interesting to start just by looking at some examples that aren't so good and talking about what's wrong with them, because I think you had some nice examples that I've seen of typical things that new writers tend to do in slides. So let's take a look. Okay, so on the screen, we've got a slide which has come from that kind of classic lesson about what would you do if, that type of language. And what's going on with this slide?
Well, the main thing that calls my attention, at least, is the fact that there's like a lot of colors going on. And if you also consider the fonts, there are, again, 3 different types of fonts. For me, the stars are a little bit distracting, because you have the instructions with the star, then let's share. So I'm not sure if I were the student, like, what does that mean or could imply. And at the same time, I think that this could be a very fun topic for students to discuss. And I think that maybe adding a picture to help convey meaning, to also be able to give students some idea of what is that they're going to be discussing, like the first time they see the slide. And it's not a terrible one, but I think that it can be improved.
It's typical of what I see when people first discover sort of PowerPoint and things, and they go a bit font crazy, a bit color crazy, and and they're not really thinking about the end user, the person who's really got to receive it. Let's look at your improved one.
I think that here I have made a use of color a little bit more efficient. I'm using violet and green only for the specific text that I want to highlight. At the same time, if I were a student, I would understand that the elements have different importance within the design. One is the title, you have the question, then you have the instructions. For me, at least, it's quite clear to identify what these different elements are. And like I said at the beginning, we have like a little picture that somehow can help convey meaning to students, so that they can probably be triggered a little bit more by this slide than by the other one with the design and the picture that we have there, that is actually a vector.
I think it's a really nice example of what happens when you add a sort of vector or picture. And I
Yeah.
also like that kind of background rectangle have behind what would you do if you won the lottery. I mean, that's something I would never think of adding, but it somehow just adds a bit of dynamism to the slide.
It gives a little bit of like you can understand that the elements that you have here in this slide have a different focus, and at least for me, that's where I go to directly. That's the first thing that I'll be reading, probably if I see this slide. And
Yeah.
that's the main point. Yeah.
Let's take a look at another one. So this is it's a slide, but it's also quite typical of the sort of thing you might see on a page, for example. So it's a
Totally.
sort of classic functions lesson, isn't it, from an elementary book?
We can see that, of course, the design is quite plain. I understand that I need to do a matching, but at the same time, the colors are like a little bit dull. And I think that it can be, I think that it's boring, to be honest. And since when we design, especially like you said, on paper, I understand that sometimes you may need more paper and that may imply more expenses. But here, if we are talking about a slide, I mean, you can add colors, you can add a picture, you can add things that can add some variety to what students be able to see, that students are going to be probably excited about introducing themselves, or to be, I don't know, excited about the next activity they're going to be doing in the class, which I think it's one of the main focus that design and these kinds of things should have. They should be able to at least transmit some emotion to students, like, hey, this is what we're going to be doing in class. Let's have some fun and learn. And here in this one, again, you can see that elements, the font is not that it's completely different to the font that we have used before. And this is done on purpose so that we can show that you can still have a serious font, or a font that is not too funky, let's say, but at the same time, it's clear. You have the picture, you have the let me introduce myself with a font that's, I think it's looks like a little bit more inviting and a little bit more relaxed, because we're going to be talking that fonts can transmit emotions, and this should be an inviting slide so that students introduce themselves.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because there's probably 4 different fonts on that slide, but they don't seem to clash like the earlier slide where all the fonts were so different. It's a kind of gradual development of the font which works. It's much easier to look at. Tell me, when you work with, because I mean, you're obviously as a teacher you produce slides, but sometimes you can get students to do presentations as well. Do you ever train your students or talk to them about how to improve their slides?
Yeah, totally. And the things that we're going to be talking today and that we are discussing today are valid for any kind of design and slides that we can prepare. And I think that it's great that we can train students the same way we teachers have a responsibility of teaching teaching our students English. At the same time, we also teach them skills, and showing them good examples of designs implies also, why not teaching them maybe some tips, or giving them some tips, so that maybe if they have an activity in the class, I have done it, I have shared a similar presentation with them. And students really value that they go to the English class not only to learn English, but also to learn other skills as well.
I think it's an interesting task to show them one version of a slide and then the second, and talk about what's been improved. And that allows us to talk in quite a global way about design, but you also deal with it at more a granular level. The first one is hierarchy. What do you mean by hierarchy in design?
In design, it means that the elements have different weight. And as you can see, it's important that we can understand that whatever elements you have on your design, they will have different impact. You can do that with color, you can do that with fonts, you can do that with size, of course. You will read this last, probably because it's a small part. You will read this first because it's big and it's with in this case, is with either red or greenish, like a kind of blue. And then you will read the one at the bottom at the end. That's giving different weight to the designs that you have, to the elements that you have on your design.
And in terms of hierarchy, if you were to add a photograph, presumably you would look at the photo first, yeah?
Totally, yeah. Totally. And I think that that's another key point, to be able to be smart when choosing the photo or the photos that you want to include in your design. and how big you want them to be in relation to, for example, the text. If you make like the slides that we have seen before, like a small picture on the right, it's just something there like to give some other information, but it's not the main focus of your design, then of course you shouldn't you shouldn't include it in a big part or give it a lot of relevance within your slide. But on the other hand, if you want your students to discuss the picture, then of course it should be bigger and more clear for students to see rather than maybe the text that you have also included on the slide.
And I suppose the natural thought process is that with hierarchy, what you want them to read first would normally come at the top of the slide, but that's presumably not always the case, is it?
No, and actually, like the one we saw at the beginning with I want to be a millionaire, that you can see the square that you had, like you said, behind the question, that's what you're gonna be reading first, and it's not necessarily what's at the top. And again, I think that might be a concept that we also have from paper design, that we read from top to bottom, but here with graphic design, with slides, you read whatever stands out first.
White space is a really interesting one, I think, in particular because as a materials writer, I write books for British English publishers and then American English. And nowadays we produce a lot of international materials. Now the English might be international, but the design is still affected by culture and countries and so on. And typically in US publishing, there's a lot of white space, and you compare it to European publishing, which is much more dense and text. And if you take a British English book, for example, and adapt it for an American market, you'll strip out certain features to get more white space on the page.
Yeah. White space, it's funny because it's called white, but it's not, of course, necessarily white, because this is a concept that comes from graphic design on paper per se. But it's it's the space that you have within the elements and the space that you give elements to breathe within your design. And the thing that happens is that it makes materials easy to read and easy to understand. And of course, there's a cultural aspect behind it. For example, in our culture, sometimes people tend to put like all of the things together without giving it much space to breathe, like I said before. And at the same time, it can be a little bit confusing for students because, like, what do I read? Where do I go? But still, it's something that teachers have a really hard time with this, because they like to put all of the elements like cramped up in a space. And it makes it difficult for students to actually know where to focus on and what to read first.
And there's a kind of tension there, isn't it? Because we're dealing with language. So there's this feeling we have to get lots of language on the page to make it feel serious or kind of educational. And that's kind of in conflict with this need to sort of, as you've put, let your designs breathe.
And at the same time, make it easier for students. It's not the same to read a book, definitely, than reading, for example, a slide, because you have the brightness maybe of the screen, maybe depending on the colors and the font that you use, you need to be careful about that, because ultimately what you want is your students to be able to see whatever is that you design clearly, that it's readable.
And of course, on the page, you've got this series of exercises where with slides, you can put individual exercises. So you've got that room to let it breathe.
Totally.
Following on from that, alignment's quite interesting. When you talk about alignment, you're talking about the positioning of what? Text or images somewhere on the screen?
It could be text, images, vectors, and anything that you can have. Maybe, for example, the line that I have below the title of alignment, those are all elements. Anything that you put on your design, it's what I mean element. And for me, at least, it's very easy to see when elements are not organized or when they are not aligned. And actually, one of the core premises of graphic design is that elements, they have to have the balance. They have to be balanced. It means equally distributed, center, on the middle, on the left, on the right, within the page.
But are there ever arguments for including tension or making the alignment tense?
Yeah, I think that it's valid if it's done on purpose and with a sound reason. Sometimes teachers, it's just because they don't know how to organize the elements, or they have a hard time organizing, or actually noticing that they are not organized, that they are not aligned. And there are tools in Google Slides or in many other, in Canva, for example, that can help you with that. And you can just, you select the elements and you can organize them, and you don't have to do anything. The program does it for you, which I think
No, I
is
mean,
great.
I personally, as somebody with no design skills, I rely on the PowerPoint to find the alignment for me quite a bit. But there are times when you need to include, say, a certain image or certain text, and it's hard to get the alignment right, and the software doesn't automatically do it for you. And I'm aware that I've got the positioning wrong, but I don't know how to fix it. I don't know what those rules are. So if I'm looking at your diagrams here, if we took the first one, you've got a straight line and then two blocks, and then we see the tension. If we compare that to the one on the right under tension, the lower bit is non-aligned, and I can see how, I mean, I might use the second one in certain contexts. I don't know, if it was a piece of text and then in a picture slightly at an angle, it might work.
I think that it also depends, like you said, on the context. Maybe if you want, on purpose, if you want to give some tension to your design. Yeah. But I think that something that can help a lot is to take a look at what other designs, as what other people do, because I think that can give you an idea of, I don't know, you need to include a picture, you're not sure where to include it in relation to the text or in relation to other elements. Maybe taking a look at some examples can be helpful for you to maybe find a new idea.
I remember at TESOL, your advice on, say, using a tool like Canva is actually don't mess with it too much. There's a reason why the templates are like what it is. And I was looking at the Canva templates thinking, you're so right, because it's been designed by experts. They understand balance and tension. It's there for a reason. So if I start shifting it around and messing, actually, I'm disrupting that balance, and I'm making it harder for students, and I'm kind of making it harder for myself. So actually, these template tools are really very useful. And you've got to be quite confident, I think, as a designer, to think you can start breaking out of it and doing other things, probably.
Completely. And they have some great designs for any kind of context, audience. So yes, I encourage people to use what they have, that somebody who knows how graphic design did them, and just adapt as little as possible.
Something else you really will need to explain this to me. How would I apply this scale and proportion?
I think that scale and proportion, it's usually given when you have the same kind of element. For example, if you're talking about pictures, if you have, for example, 4 pictures or 4 things that are quite similar, or at least 2 and 2, the fact that you have them organized within a space and you give them the same relevance on purpose, or you give them a different relevance on purpose. If you have 4 pictures, the way I see it, they should have equal weight within your design, like the first 4 that we are seeing. But maybe on purpose, you want to give them different kinds of impact in your design because of whatever reason. Maybe because the picture is more relevant for students at that moment. Maybe because you are talking about a specific grammar or vocabulary aspect that makes it relevant for the design, for the size of those pictures to be smaller. And I think that it's important that we do this, again, on purpose and aware that we're giving a different weight to the elements that we have in our design.
Right. So if I took the third one on the right-hand side, the focus is there is clearly, if I had 4 photographs, 2 big photographs would be the main focus of my lesson.
Yeah.
But I might just add the other two, perhaps decoratively, or maybe, I don't know, maybe the one in the bottom right-hand side is almost a glossary picture. It's explaining a
Yeah,
concept.
for me, it's evident that the smaller or the smallest one of here, they have different importance. You're giving on purpose different importance to those two that are smaller in relation to the others that are bigger.
Okay, and this one, contrast.
Contrast is it's something that graphic designers use in order to make something stand out from your design. And what I'm saying here is that you can do that through form, through color, or through size. Because actually, again, you can be talking about the same kind of elements. Like, again, if we're talking about pictures, but maybe it could be different elements. And maybe you're having an activity in which you want students to, I don't know, discuss about the element that is the different one, because the other ones are just maybe like supporting topics, let's say. Or you want students to have different opinions on the elements that you have on your design, and you are giving students the clue by having them with different contrast when it comes to maybe size. I mean, this is something that teachers can use a lot in order to be able to prompt students, in order to be able to give them some other elements for them to discuss in their classes.
I mean, the one on size, it actually reminded me of something I was working on recently. I was working with an infographic to show comparatives. It was statistics. And normally, if you show statistics connected with the world on the page, typically it's in the lesson on comparatives and superlatives or something like that.
Yeah.
But you're looking for some visually interesting way to do it. And we came across an infographic that was just bubbles, you know, like the one you've got listed there on the right-hand side, just different size circles. And to do them in different colors and then to add the statistics just suddenly brought it to life on the page. What could have been a very boring topic, you know, or just presented as a table. And just that sort of use of shape and difference, I think it added a lot of kind of natural design to the page without much. It didn't require a great deal of design skill in a way. You just needed to sort of think slightly outside of the box with it.
And I think that it's important that we take a look at examples, because we are not reinventing the wheel or anything. And there are some great designs that have already been done by experts, and they know a lot about. And I think that's something that teachers should take a look and try to imitate as much as possible. So
you've got one on margins.
Yeah, this is a concept that comes from paper design for the most part, but I think that it's completely valid for graphic design, for digital graphic design as well. The safety area is the space that probably it's gonna be safe, and maybe it's not gonna be cut out. Again, if it's on paper, if it's, for example, a graphic design that you do like a slide, sometimes what happens is that if you put things really, really in the margins of your screen, maybe you show it somewhere else, and for some reasons they are cut. So I think that it's important that we can stick to a specific area. You can choose what the area would be. I mean, there are standards, of course, in paper design, but for design on slides, there's not, of course. But I think that it's good that we keep elements not so close to the ends of your whatever your slide may be, no matter what program you use. But I think that it's something that teachers should always consider, or at least try to consider, to stick to that safe area within the design.
Yeah, I think the only I would agree with that. The only exception I find is if I want a photograph to kind of bleed off the edge of the slide, but then I have been caught out because there might be something crucial on the photograph that on the wrong kind of projection system you lose it. But it's safe.
Yeah.
If you look at your photo and the margin around the photograph, there's nothing crucial to the image. It's more central.
Yeah.
That's,
or if you include text, I think that it's important that you make sure that you give some space to the text that's for example, on the edges of your slide so that it's not cut out, and maybe you want to show it to students. They're supposed to discuss a question, and then it happens that the text cannot be fully seen.
Which brings us on to text and font. What's the number one mistake you see going on with fonts typically on a slides or on a worksheet?
I remember when I was at TESOL that a teacher mentioned Comic Sans, and it was super fun because teachers like to overuse. She told me, but I love Comic Sans. And I'm like, okay, yes, it's okay to love Comic Sans, but it's like, we have used it for so many years that we are tired of Comic Sans, and there are some other great fonts that you can use.
It's funny, Comic Sans just looks very dated these days, doesn't it? It looks like something we used 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at use of fonts. I think it's helpful to begin by defining what is the difference between a serif font and a sans serif font.
As you can see on the serif examples, where it says tradition, respect, and comfort, the fonts that we have used there, at the end, for example, as you can see with the T, they end with that little tail. And for example, the sans serif fonts, as you can see, are more clean. For example, stable, objective, and modern. As you can see, for example, the T again does not have that. And serif and sans serif fonts are different, and teachers should consider these, especially if they're going to be using paper design or graphic design when it comes to Google Slides, because it's more common to use sans serif fonts when it comes to computers, and maybe serif fonts are more traditional when it comes to printing materials such as newspapers.
Yeah, although I think even nowadays most people would default to sans serif font, wouldn't they? I think
they are more modern. Yeah,
unless you wanted the text to look old and dated in some way, then you might use sort of a Times New Roman type thing.
Exactly. And in English books, it's very common to see maybe, for example, an article, a text. If it's, for example, a story, a poem, or a newspaper, it's more common to see the text within the textbooks using serif fonts.
And what's going on in the lower half in the difference between script and decorative?
The fact is that teachers, we like using decorative fonts because, again, they are friendly, expressive, especially, I don't know, if you're having an activity on a holiday or something that can be a little bit more fun for students to discuss. And the script are more related to handwriting, or they try to imitate handwriting. I think that sometimes it can be difficult to read if you have like a lot of text using a script font. Maybe if you're gonna be including some names, I don't know, if you're trying to imitate a postcard, a letter, or an email, maybe you can use a script font. But I think that, I would discourage it because I think that it's difficult for students to read, again, if it's a lot of text. Right. And the same with the other ones, with decorative fonts. Again, they should be used only for titles or things that you want to stand out, but not for a full text.
Now, this is an interesting one because here you're talking about how you combine fonts, and because I'm very conservative when it comes to my use of fonts, so I'll use sans serif and I'll probably change the size from 10 to 12, or I'll use bold if I want to get some difference. I'd be very nervous about combining two different styles of fonts.
As you can see, for example, the one that says contrast font weights, that's what we're discussing just now. It's just the same font, but maybe what you're using is bold just to give it, or size just to give some difference. Yeah. But avoid combining three different fonts on a very short space, such as the one that says keep it simple in red. And probably the text that you have at the bottom, it's difficult to read. Imagine a student having to read like a text in which you use that font. It looks funky, it looks fun, but it's difficult to read.
Yeah, and I think certainly in these days where we're really aware of issues like dyslexia and so on, then we have to be
Totally,
extra careful with it. That's why
totally.
fonts like Arial are quite nice, because you get the choice of Arial bold, Arial narrow, so it's easy to kind of keep the font but add a bit of difference between headings and so on, which goes back to your earlier point about hierarchy of fonts and size and
Exactly,
that kind of thing. Yeah. Okay,
exactly.
all good advice. Now, for somebody who's has real problems with color, um,
Hmm.
we haven't touched on color that much, but I really like this slide because this bothers me a lot, particularly when I go to presentations, and
Yeah.
this trend for putting a colored background and then a different color font. For me, a white background with a very strong color on top is the safest way to go. What's your general advice?
I agree with you. I think that the safest option is always to go for white background, and then if you want to add variety, you can do it with color font, and again with types of fonts. I think that you can maybe, I wouldn't do like an entire presentation with a blue background and a green text, even though its readability is quite good. I think that the problem is that it can be tiring for the eye. And if you're watching like a screen that it's full of, I don't know, in this case, blue, it can be tiring after a few slides. So maybe if you want to go on a slide or two because you want to emphasize something, then I think it's something that you can go for. But at the same time, I agree with you. I think that the safest option is always to go for white background.
Right. But I thought this was a really useful reference slide. It's quite interesting when you start to consider different color combinations. So you might get a sort of
Yeah,
violet on yellow. Actually, that kind of works. In certain contexts, you could imagine it working.
exactly. And what happens is that sometimes because of what you said, some people may be colorblind. So for some others, they may not even be able to read whatever it is that you have on your slide. And if you are presenting to an audience that it's maybe probably a large audience, you don't know the people on it. It's not the same as if you would if you know your students, for example. So I think that it's always safer.
So we've looked a lot at text, use of color, positioning. We can't finish without talking about images used on slides. And I don't just mean photographs, I mean sort of cartoons, illustrations, anything like that.
Mhm.
My usual advice when I do training with writers is to say, just use a picture if you're actually integrating it into the materials. It's got to do some work. Now, you do see in lots of published materials, you might see images that aren't really used there to create mood or theme. Or so if, I don't know, if it was the beginning of a unit on sport, you might use
Mhm.
just a general kind of mood image of sport. But even then, I always look for some opportunity to make use of the image. Is there any kind of argument, do you think, just for a decorative image?
Again, if it's digital, you don't have to pay for the space that you use. And I think that images do convey meaning, and especially in English language teaching, I think that it's important that we trigger our students before we're going to be discussing a specific topic so that we get them in the mood. So I think that it's a definitely yes. But again, at the same time, I think that it's important that we don't overuse those images that are not, I mean, that don't have a specific purpose. Because if not, it's like, what's the point? You can tell me it's decor, and I can say, yeah, sure, it can be a little bit of decoration, and definitely. But again, like, I think that it's important to have a purpose on the elements that you include on your design. And that it's done rationally and with a specific intention behind it.
Lots of people who watch this YouTube channel will be familiar because we have had other videos where we've
Mhm,
talked about where we get images and things like Pexel, Pixabay, Unsplash. They're
mhm.
great because you can get free images, and as you've done here, you can reference the photographer. Sometimes I'll pay money if it's a photo I really want for a presentation because it just has that impact. But what I've started to notice, I've started to see the same photo appearing in different presentations.
Yes.
How much do you go out and just take, because I mean, it's so easy to take a photo now. Do you ever just go out and take your own?
I do because actually I like photography and for example, if I have been to a place, I have used many times pictures with my students that I have taken myself. I think that it's the use of pictures, it's a little bit tricky because sometimes teachers, like we said at the beginning, don't have a lot of time. So they just go and take one that it's not theirs to be used. And I think that it's super important to respect authors and to respect attribution whenever it's necessary. So that's why I think that going through these specific image banks that do offer those pictures for free, or like you said, if you like one, you can pay for it for a specific use. I think that we should be respectful of other people's work because actually this is work for many people. And for us, maybe it can be decoration to our slide, but for many people, it's work. So I think that it's important that we are aware of this and that we try to be careful and of the pictures that we choose and use in our materials.
Now, an area you talk about that was quite new to me, tell me about vectors, because I've seen vectors and I've used them, but I don't really understand the sort of background to them. You can find them on sites like Pixabay and so on. So what exactly is a vector graphic?
A vector, it's made of lines, points, and elements. It's like a drawing. And the good thing that vectors can have is that you can zoom them in or out and they do not lose quality. And on the other hand, what happens with pictures is that they have a specific resolution. So if it's a very small picture and you make it big, you may not see clearly. And I think that that's a great thing about vectors. If they are downloaded correctly, you shouldn't have that problem. And again, for English language teaching, I think they are a great help to convey ideas, to try to trigger students to talk about a specific topic. I'm a huge fan of vectors for...
Tell me, from a practical point of view, if you go to a site like Pixabay, are you normally paying for vectors or are they often free?
No, because they are free. Not, I mean, the same with pictures. You may need if you want to pay, but there are many that are free.
Let's conclude and bring this all together with a couple of slides from you, which I really like because they really drive home the message of less is more. They're they're deceptively simple slides, actually, but they're quite emotive. This one I particularly like. Tell me how you came up with this one.
On the bottom, that's a vector, which is it's a smaller vector that I have used like 3 or 4 times so that I was able to have like the grass at the bottom of the slide, pretending, of course, that it's real grass. And since we are talking about nature, the fact that you can have the grass, you have the text in green, and also I think that the font here can transmit nature. I don't know if it's why I
But this is interesting, isn't it? After all our discussion on fonts, and here's an example of where we haven't gone with a safe sans serif. We've actually gone for something which has emotion, and I think it's really nice use of it because we're using it, and there isn't that much text on the screen, so we're not asking them to read it for a long time, but it just captures sort of something naturey about it, and it has that right
it
kind
has
of
that
emotion.
vibe.
Yeah. But there's also plenty of white space. I was thinking about hierarchy. I mean, the alignment is kind of clear, but in terms of hierarchy, actually, I'm drawn to the grass when I first look at it, and then I kind of make my way up almost. Yeah.
But I think, of course, can we change it and make it better? Definitely. But well, this
you could, but I don't know. I don't know what else I would do to it particularly. I think it sort of does the job, but it kind of keeps it kind of captures a mood. I just like it. And then this is a really nice one just to finish off a lesson, or if you were giving a presentation anyway, you might ask your audience, you know, the same kind of question.
Yeah, I think that in here, again, that's a vector. what you are giving its input, because you're giving like the different phases, because students can maybe point to the different pictures, or they can maybe say the emotion or say how they feel after the class. And again, the use of blue is like a little bit relaxing because it's probably the end of the class. The font, it's inviting, it's not distracting, but it's inviting, and it gives like a little bit of sense of like, okay, we are done, we can relax. It's like a fun font as well.
Something we didn't actually mention about when we talked about color, because I forced you to go straight into talking about foreground, background, is actually colors evoke emotion. So we've got the green there linked with nature, and we've got this blue there, which is quite a relaxing blue, isn't it? It's not
Ocean, yeah.
yeah, it's quite sort of it's a nice gentle way to finish the lesson. So there is a sort of that thinking going on in the color choice as well.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be a professional to be a great designer. I think that when if you consider and if you are aware of the things that we mentioned today, I think that teachers can really go a long way and save time, which is, of course, something key for educators.
Thanks to Lucia for that video packed with information on design, things I hadn't considered before, things I thought I knew about and discovered I didn't really know about. Lots of takeaways if you're preparing slides for your students, for conferences, or you're thinking about design on the page, or maybe you're preparing students to give presentations. I think you'll agree there was lots in there. If you like what you saw, go and look at some of the other videos, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.